With so much going on of late, I had not even noticed the release of yet another in Nintendo's amazing Ask the Developer series until I came to start scripting a video on GameChat, which is the topic of this new interview. As ever, I will link the original interview, so if you want to just read it straight off without my asides, then please do feel free. But otherwise, please settle in as we explore the GameChat and its developers, read the interview, and talk a little bit about it alongside. Off the top, we have three key individuals interviewed, and I think it's telling that all three are from very different parts of Nintendo's organization. Firstly, we have EPD Sumikazu Ono. Continuing the trend of EPD credits of late, Ono is not identified as being attached to a specific development group, but there are two aspects that give us hope that we will see specific group credits in future. The first point of optimism is that it seems that Ono's Nintendo credits are relatively slight, with special thanks on Tomodachi Life and Nintendo Badge Arcade, and a history previously of working on titles outside Nintendo. This suggests that he has been working on non-game related content adjacent to the main system groups for some time, which is intriguing, and perhaps he has not actually been attached to any specific working group in EPD, although Tomodachi was developed by EPD7 on 3DS, though I have questioned separately whether that group still exists. Our second ray of hope is that Yoshitaka Tamura from the Technology Department is credited with being from Technology Development Group 2. We know that Group 1 put out a llama, of course. According to Kyoto Report, Tamura joined Nintendo in 2011 and worked as a hardware engineer on the Wii U and Nintendo Switch, but also worked on Ring Fit Adventure, something that I think augurs well for a future fitness title, though that is for a separate video. The third member of the trio is Eiji Tokunaga. Tokunaga was interviewed by Nintendo's website in 2013, relatively soon after joining the company, and at that point he was working in software, beginning with the development of the DSi browser. He has a love of woodwind instruments, and one area of university research was how can people use computers without stress. As for Nintendo Systems, where he works, I have a separate deep dive on that topic, but essentially the company was forged through a partnership with Japanese mobile tech giant DNA, and while most of their activities seem fairly behind the scenes, they recently gave a fairly comprehensive seminar at an Amazon Web Services conference. With this background out of the way, let's dive into the interview, and I think it's worth sharing their introductions. First, Ono says, "Hi, I'm Sumikazu Ono from the Entertainment Planning Department. I was the director in charge of overseeing the development of the Nintendo Switch 2's system's built-in features. In other words, the software that comes pre-installed on the console. I've been working on the development of built-in hardware features ever since I started at Nintendo, and since joining the development of the Nintendo 3DS activity log as a programmer, I've always worked together with Tokunaga-san. For the Nintendo Switch, I served as the programming director overseeing the built-in features, but this time the scope of my responsibilities was ever broader." End quote. Eiji Tokunaga then says, "Hi, I'm Eiji Tokunaga from Nintendo Systems Company Limited. As the technical director for built-in features, I oversaw the development of the system software and servers required to run them. I've also been working on the development of system software since the days of Nintendo 3DS. Ono-san and I have been developing system software together on site for a long time, so the fact that we're both now leading our own teams is a big deal for us." Finally, Yoshitaka Tamura adds, "Hello, I'm Yoshitaka Tamura from the Technology Development Department. I was involved in the development of the Nintendo Switch 2 camera, sold separately, which plugs into the console. My role was to consider the camera's specifications based on what features it should have and how using it together with GameChat could offer players a better experience. In the past, I was involved in the development of motion IR cameras and HD rumble for controllers and accessories, and I also served as the project leader for Ring Fit Adventure." End quote. Yet again, the intersection between camera development and Ring Fit Adventure is worth noting, but is something for a future conversation. Ono starts by explaining what GameChat is, confirming that either using the Switch's microphone or other microphones such as headsets, players can voice and video chat and share their game screens with other players as well. And as we speculated about for years, there was a time that video was being mulled as a potential inclusion for the hardware. In the quote that follows, Koichi Kawamoto is mentioned. Kawamoto is from EPD4 and was one of the core trio responsible for the development of Switch 2. Over to Ono then. I believe development began around 2020 when we started thinking about what we could do with built-in features in the next hardware. At the time, I still didn't know what the next hardware would be like, but I'd heard that the team was considering a Nintendo Switch successor. Then Kawamoto-san asked us, do you have any ideas for built-in features that would make the next hardware stand out? As the team brainstormed, the idea of voice chat being a good pre-installed feature came up. When Kawamoto-san asked us for ideas, he gave us the theme of a student lounge. A student lounge is a space where students gather and mingle. We were discussing how it would be nice to recreate that student lounge-like atmosphere where everyone gathers not only to play games, but also just to hang out. The concept of the student lounge matched the idea of the built-in voice chat feature the team had in mind. Until now, online play for Nintendo games has meant everyone coming together to play the same game. But more than anything, we wanted to create a space where people would naturally gather, whether it's to play the same game together or different games, or even just to watch. The team proposed that such a space would create a whole new way to voice chat, unlike Nintendo's previous voice chats. This matched the theme of the student lounge, so we decided to create a prototype. End quote. And aside from me, the use of themes is something that Nintendo does quite a lot in its development approaches. Hands, for example, was a major theme of Tears of the Kingdom. It is interesting that this approach applies not just to game technology, but also to the atmosphere of their more social apps. I also think it's very significant that even by 2020, they were still looking for distinctive ideas and features for their new console, even though the project had begun in 2019. People have called Switch 2 an iterative console, and broadly it is, but I think it's also worth considering that constant innovation is a challenge in itself, and they were clearly pushing their internal teams to find ways to continue to stand out and be different. This also ties into anecdotes in the earlier interview referring how some aspects of the new system were inspired by COVID-related issues. Let's continue to hear from Nintendo Systems Tokunaga, but some context to his next words. Remember when he discusses his team is significantly made up of employees from a mobile networking company, so perhaps the focus of their ideas isn't too much of a surprise. Tokunaga says, our team was also thinking of communications technology as key to the next gaming console. Several of us had the same thing in mind, and were each researching our own thing. Some voice chat, some live streaming, others microphones with noise cancellation. It was around that time that Ono-san approached me and asked whether it would be possible to implement a feature to facilitate player communication. I responded, actually, my team has been researching something similar. Why don't we create a demo together? From there, the first demo was completed rather smoothly, and we felt from a relatively early stage that this was going to be something good. On our ads, I was astonished to discover that Tokunaga-san's team had already been conducting similar research, so we decided to make a prototype, but at the time, Switch 2 hadn't even taken shape yet, so the research was done on a Switch console with increased memory and an improved CPU. Because both teams had done so much research in advance, the prototype was completed in only 6 months, give or take. End quotes. Several interesting aspects here. First of all, that improved Switch prototype sounds awfully like the rumoured Switch Pro. Now, I'm not saying that Switch Pro existed necessarily, or that GameChat was a Switch Pro app, although if they had managed to pull this off for a release when the OLED did in 2021, I think Switch sales might have gone truly thermonuclear given the cross-section of the success of the Switch and the success during the pandemic of tech that enabled social interaction. Additionally, this is yet another example of where different teams have been operating in sealed bubbles and then discover that they are working on broadly similar principles. And I'm very interested with the way Nintendo's development teams seem to be structured. On the one hand, it makes a huge amount of sense to have siloed research groups with narrow frames of reference and the ability to experiment and dabble in new things. The risk is that if you have groups that are too large, the ideas homogenize, diverse voices become suppressed, and you lose creative spark. Still, this discussion reflects on the status quo largely as it was pre or in the early days of the pandemic. We know that the development of Super Mario Bros. Wonder, they actually used bulletin boards for the whole company to share wild and wacky Wonder Flower ideas, and it seems like one of the aspects Nintendo may want to focus on is allowing a greater cross-pollination of ideas from across its development teams. Having a very large new building in Kyoto to centralize a lot of people will certainly help with that, but of course Nintendo also has people in Tokyo, Austin, Redmond and Vancouver, and it seems that while GameChat as an option is a great way to connect players, this philosophy might, interestingly, be applied to the relationships between game developers as well. Tamura also gives us an idea of Nintendo's long-term plans for a camera system, suggesting that although the camera was stripped from the design for Switch after the 3DS utilized it, it was a long-term aim for the successor to reintegrate the technology. Tamura says, "On the hardware development side, we've always kept up to date with the latest camera technology. One day we were told that a communication feature might be implemented in the Switch successor, and that there might be a need for video chat as well as voice chat, so we started thinking about camera specifications accordingly. As mentioned earlier, the theme was a student lounge, so we thought it was important for the atmosphere in the room to carry over to other players. We saw the camera playing a key role, so we started to consider its specifications in earnest." End quote. Now, while it took a short time to implement, Tokunaga dryly commented that taking it from the prototype to the final product took an age. Ono explains the process. "When we were developing GameChat, we had in mind that it would be a defining feature of Switch 2. During development, we had the opportunity for Nintendo executives to experience GameChat, seeing them try out the feature for the first time and be able to video chat and share game screens smoothly gave us a certain confidence that this works." End quote. Tokunaga added, "The executives were happily reminiscing about the development of the Super NES and Nintendo 64 games they were playing as they shared their screens. Seeing that made me realize this feature's potential. I don't think ever before have I so wished that Nintendo had recorded behind-the-scenes footage. Just imagine the discussions these veterans of the industry might have been having. While we don't know exactly who was in this demo, good shouts would be the top two at EPD and Nintendo Direct regular hosts Shinya Takahashi and Yoshiaki Koizumi, the latter of whom was also the producer of the original Nintendo Switch." Ono continues, "But we felt we needed to dig deeper and fully explore the potential of game screen sharing by playing before we could feel confident of it truly becoming a defining feature of Switch 2. So, we spent about 2 hours every day playing various games while sharing screens via GameChat, and continued researching the kinds of situations in which it would be fun to use this feature. Back then, we were still prototyping this feature on Switch, so we were testing Game Chat with games that had already been released for Switch. One day, one of our team members was playing a puzzle game called Baba Is You, and the rest of us were curious to know what kind of game it was. The person who was playing the game shared their screen and said, 'It's a game played with these rules.' And we were all like, wow, we didn't know such an interesting puzzle game existed. Fast forward a day and the whole team was playing it. That was a moment where game screen sharing really shone." End quote from Ono. You can easily see how this kind of contagious video game experience would appeal both to the video game enthusiasts at Nintendo's development teams and all the way up to the more commercially minded team at the top. It also makes me a little sad that Nintendo is generally quite reticent with letting its developers go out for interviews, because it strikes me that watching an interview in Game Chat where even Treehouse interviewers and some of Nintendo's top people were joining in would be a huge and quite fun and different type of event. Shigeru Miyamoto has just entered the chat. I don't expect it to happen often, but surely there has to be a good 70% chance that we will see a developer on GameChat somehow or other by the end of 2026. Still, Tokunaga recounts how even one-player games felt different when played through the prism of GameChat. He said, "When I tried out GameChat with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, what I found interesting was that I felt like I was playing an online game even though it isn't one. For example, suppose two friends are playing the game at their own pace, separately from one another. When one of them says, 'I don't know how to solve this puzzle,' the other could say, 'I'm on my way there, wait for me,' go to the same location in their own game, and share their screen to demonstrate how to solve the puzzle. A phrase like, 'I'm on my way there, wait for me,' is something you don't hear when playing offline games. That's when I felt strongly that this feature could bring additional value to existing games." End quote. The trio go to discuss how this social element will help stop players getting lost and improve social connections in games, and they realise that this would be, as they say, one of the defining features of Switch 2. And they also reference the terms of the open access period lasting until the 31st of March 2026. Tamura further talks about something that I think elevates GameChat compared to other similar functionality: its apparent ease of use. This is from Tamura. While we ourselves have seen how GameChat can expand the ways in which games can be enjoyed, we felt it was important to make the feature easy to use. Voice or video chat for gaming often involves a little extra work in setting up the equipment, but Switch 2 has a built-in microphone, so you can easily use voice chat, and the Switch 2 camera, which is sold separately, is simple to use with a setup that is not too complicated. Thanks to increased hardware processing performance and yearly improvements in networking equipment and environments, we've finally reached the point where this feature can easily be realized." End quote. What he doesn't mention, but which I think is significant, is that any compatible USB camera will apparently work, though I guess it's ultimately for Nintendo to decide what compatibility requirements they enforce. They discuss the ease of use a lot and explain that this is why the C button came into being. Here are the details of how this came about at the very last minute. Ono says, "I thought it would be bothersome to have to pause the game, go to the home menu, set up the chat, and then return to the game every time you want to use this feature. So we asked for a special button to be added while the hardware design was in process. It was a very last-minute request, just before the controller molds were about to be made." Tamura says, "But I think having the C button was absolutely the right choice. Pressing the C button to start a chat, operate the camera, or adjust the settings is really intuitive, and I think it will create a completely new experience for players." Tokunaga adds, "Ultimately, we were able to implement a very simple control method that enables players to instantly start game chat simply by pressing the C button anytime while they're playing." End quotes. While I know that some people were disappointed that C did not stand for something more whizzy than chat, I think this was the exact right move, and it's funny to think how recently this development was apparently implemented. With the rise of game streaming as a lucrative industry in its own right, it makes perfect sense for Nintendo to try to transplant both experiences to console, something that traditionally was quite difficult. Tokunaga drills down on the complexities of ensuring the game's ease of use. He said, "The more we focus on making it easy to use, the more things we as developers need to consider. For example, not only did we want a built-in microphone, but we also wanted it to be used without any setup. However, implementing a built-in microphone is actually quite difficult. If we don't make any adjustments, the microphone would naturally pick up sounds from the game, such as music. But if those aren't removed, then the most important sounds, the player's voices, might be drowned out. Especially in handheld mode, controller sounds such as buttons being pressed and rumble would also get picked up, so those need to be removed too. On the other hand, in TV mode, when players are far away from the console, their voices need to be picked up without them having to shout. This means achieving two conflicting concepts: removing the loud sounds coming from the TV while picking up the faint voices of players sitting far away from the console. We installed a high-performance audio chip dedicated to voice processing and fine-tuned it relentlessly until it only picked up the sounds we wanted it to." End quote, with the last comment responding to Ono's observation that they kept asking the impossible, including to remove as much noise as possible that isn't someone's voice, but to leave in the sounds of people clapping. Ono added more context on the use cases and how the speakers functioned. He says, "You have my eternal gratitude. One time I was asked, is it just one person's voice we need to pick up, or is it everyone if it's being used by a family? It'd make our lives easier if you could narrow it down to one or the other." To which I answered, it's not an either or question, it's both. After all, we wanted to take various factors into account, like how far the couch is from the TV and where players are sitting on the couch. Tokunaga-san once told me to please stop being so vague, but if you're going to say no setup required, then it needs to be able to handle various situations. To hit our goal of no setup required, we worked hard to balance the speaker's volume. Since the game and the voice chat sounds play together out of the same speaker, we worked with the sound team to determine which one should stand out more. Even without manual setup, voice chat stands out more when someone is talking, and when no one's speaking, game sound will be more prominent. There's a natural transition between the two. Tokunaga interjects, "The microphone automatically detects which sounds are essential and adjusts the audio balance of voices so they're comfortable to hear. So, for example, if you switch from TV mode, which picks up voices at a distance, to handheld mode, which picks up voices nearby, the voices won't suddenly get louder for the person on the other side of the voice chat, and you can continue using the feature smoothly." Back to Ono. "We regard the ability to seamlessly transition between TV mode and handheld mode while using voice chat as one of the unique features of Nintendo Switch 2. If you're using voice chat in TV mode and a family member wants to use the TV, you can just remove the console from the dock and continue to voice chat as is in handheld mode." Tokunaga concludes, "You can take it anywhere in handheld mode, so you can, for example, voice chat and play games while lying on your bed. If, and it is always a big if, but if all this works as the team feel it does, I can imagine this being an incredibly powerful social experience. For years, video games have been associated with social isolation, solitary people bent double squinting at a docked matrix screen, and when Nintendo pioneered a new kind of connectivity with Pokemon, it really broke big. Now we're in an age where people can talk in games, but these are often in game-specific fields, and sometimes these can have quite negative connotations, such as the macho posturing of some hyper-competitive Fortnite fanatics. There is a real risk with anything like this that the intended use is not the final usage, but in theory, the ability to seamlessly transition a game into being a social experience sounds really intriguing, and in particular, the ability to link together handheld and TV mode players. Tamura then expands on one aspect that I find particularly exciting about the Switch 2, and which I will delve into more in a separate video, which is the camera. We created the Nintendo Switch 2 camera as an accessory which is sold separately. With TV mode in mind, we deliberately avoided having a built-in camera. I thought that in TV mode, the positioning of the console would differ for each person, so it'd be better to create something that could be used immediately without any setup, just by connecting it whenever and wherever it's needed, so that people who wanted one could get one. One of the strengths of the Nintendo Switch 2 camera is that it uses a very wide-angle lens to capture the atmosphere in a player's living room, and it's preset to provide the optimal viewing angle. The camera is designed to capture players, whether they're near or far from it, alone or in a group, or even if they're playing a game controlled with body movements. But what we value the most is how clearly their facial expressions are shown. We thought that in order to convey a game's atmosphere, we needed to make players' facial expressions clearly visible to others. So, we added a feature to automatically recognize people's faces and show them in the highest resolution possible. In terms of clearly capturing facial expressions, we were also conscious of the lighting in the room where Switch 2 would be played. In the evening especially, I think some people play games with the lights dimmed to help them relax. Even in those kinds of situations, the brightness is automatically adjusted so that facial expressions can be seen clearly. End quote. Ono also observed, giving the pitch for buying the Switch 2 specific camera, for many USB cameras, if the person is far away from the lens, they'll appear small and become blurry when zoomed in. But the Nintendo Switch 2 camera has a software feature that automatically processes the image to minimize blurring as much as possible when zoomed in and display facial expressions clearly. End quote. I will say that I'm intrigued. Given that this is a software feature and not a hardware feature, it seems like it should be possible to use even with standard USB cameras, but I guess it's understandable that Nintendo wants to funnel people towards their bespoke technology, and it's at least reasonable of them to permit third-party cameras in the first place, I guess. I also think it's clear that this technology is very much an evolution of the kind of video conferencing technology that we've seen become ubiquitous through Teams and Zooms and such like. This next exchange references concepts that aren't particularly innovative in the context of these kinds of technologies, but which are still quite exciting to see implemented by Nintendo. Ono starts. Another request I made regarding the camera was to hide the background and display just the players. I thought there might be some people who would be hesitant to use the camera if their room was visible. So the default setting hides the background. Now, if you combine this with sharing your game screen, in reality it's just a video chat with friends, but the way it's presented makes it look like YouTubers streaming their gameplay. I reckon it will be fun for friends to play together as if they are live streamers. Tokunaga adds, you may have seen PC and smartphone cameras that hide backgrounds, but for game systems, the background needs to be hidden while the system is also using processing power to run the game, which is a real challenge. However, I think that whether the background is visible or not also affects safety and security, so we kept on fine-tuning it to use the least amount of processing power to show only the players. Finally, we achieved something we could be confident in. Ono concludes, the background is properly hidden even with multiple people, not just when you're playing alone. I don't think I've seen that often. End quotes. Despite running a video gaming YouTube channel, I've never had any live streaming aspirations, but I know this kind of thing is a massive draw, particularly for younger players. The thing is, when all this went out, I found in the reactions a certain amount of diffidence from the voices of seasoned gamers stating that this game chat service is old hat as a concept. But if they can pitch this not to the kinds of people who already use this tech, but to people who have never really thought of having games as a social medium before, I can imagine a simple, entry-level experience based around Nintendo games being a very effective thing to launch. While hopefully a lockdown situation will not happen again, Japan is a little more familiar with such things due not just to the 2020 pandemic, but also to the 2003 SARS outbreak, which required similar measures in the country for shorter periods. The opportunity for game chat to really emerge as a significant part of people's daily experiences therefore seems significant. Tokunaga discussed some of the technical challenges in this segment, where he said, voices and videos are streamed to other players via servers to help ensure voice chat works smoothly all over the world. We've set up servers not only in Japan, but in various other countries and regions. Since Switch 2 is a gaming system, we needed to dedicate a significant percentage of its resources to playing games, while using what's left to run game chat. On top of that, it needs to run stably to avoid impacting the game negatively. Lots of processes are happening at once, removing noise from the audio, hiding the video background, sending and receiving data over the network, compressing and decompressing data. It's packed with various technologies from various teams, so it was challenging to integrate everything, organize it, and make it all work. Because of this, we often described the development as having festival vibes. Whenever someone came up against a challenge during development, various people would gather around and say, are you having trouble? Let me help. Then we'd all work together to solve it. As mentioned earlier, game chat is a combination of various technologies, and since it has to run alongside a game, if too much processing resource is spent on any part of game chat, it could affect the game's performance. Therefore, we had to fine-tune all the technologies involved. That necessitated the involvement of people from various teams, but everyone was so reliable and said, if it's for game chat, we'll make it work. Everyone likes solving problems with technology and they have fun doing it. Those festival vibes lasted more than 2 years, and with more than 100 people involved, what a festival it was. End quote. I think it's clear that Nintendo is dedicating a lot of effort into making game chat a success, and it will be interesting to see how future big-scale games like Zelda modulate themselves to try to incorporate game chat. It also makes me wonder whether third-party games would ever try to optimize still further by removing game chat functionality, and whether if the tool becomes popular and a widely used one, this could actually hurt the games because of reduced sharing and lower profile. Ono continues with more on these fine details, including the trial and error process of creating the student lounge experience. He said, during development, we held daily meetings with everyone using GameChat to test, verify, and improve it. We fine tuned every last detail while soaking in those festival vibes. We mentioned earlier how GameChat can be made to resemble a gaming live stream, but at the same time, it's not a live streaming tool, so we consciously avoided giving that impression. The main purpose of GameChat is to communicate via speech. It also supports features like screen sharing and video chat when using a camera, so we hope people will enjoy trying out GameChat with friends. To avoid confusion, we went through a lot of trial and error, especially when it came to the layout for sharing game screens. For example, there's a feature where you can expand and view the game screen of another player. When you do that, only the game screen is expanded and not the camera image of the player themselves. If a player expands a game screen, then that must be the thing they want to see more clearly. So we wanted players to be able to look at that screen while hanging out with close friends using voice chat and so on. We envisioned a place where close friends could gather. Everyone is sharing a space, but one person might be looking at their smartphone while another is playing a game and someone else is reading a comic. So everyone's doing their own thing, but it still feels comfortable being together. It's the same thing with game chat. Everyone can be playing the same game together or each be playing a different game while they enjoy hanging out. That's the kind of carefree and comfortable space we're hoping to achieve. End quote. A note also indicates that up to 4 people can share their screens in the same game chat session, although I would bet that if the technology is successful, a future switch to revision might bump that number up to 6 or 8. I suppose it depends on both whether they can optimize the software to be less intensive on the memory, and also whether they can increase the power of the system itself in a future revision. However, Tokunaga and Ono also discuss the ease of use cases, and I think this sounds to me like one of the most attractive features. This section involves all 3 gentlemen contributing. Tokunaga starts. With Game Chat, I think conversations between friends will change from "Let's play Mario Kart at 3 p.m. to "I'll send you a Game Chat invite, come join." For example, with past Nintendo consoles, I don't think it was as easy to arrange an online play session without deciding in advance what games to play and when. But with the introduction of Game Chat, friends can just start gathering together even if they don't arrange the game and time in advance. While they each do their own thing, they can discuss what to play next or check out what their friends are playing and so on. I think this is a big change. Ono continues, also while testing out game screen sharing, we realized it's also effective at filling the gaps in conversation. With voice chat, people tend to feel like they have to keep talking, but by sharing your game screen, it's like you're communicating without speaking, so you can stay in that space without it becoming awkward. And then a conversation might start from another player's game screen that happens to catch your attention. Over to Tamura. Even just looking at someone else's game screen can spark a conversation like, "What game is that?" or "How did you do that?" At which point everyone might put down their controllers and focus on one player's screen. You can show others how to play by gesturing to the camera with your controller and saying, "Use this button," and so on. So I think it creates new ways to enjoy games that you've been playing alone. Back to Ono. Speaking of new ways to have fun, we made a new discovery when we were playing Stardew Valley Online with everyone using Game Chat. When everyone is assigned a role and starts collecting their materials, it's easy to lose track of where everyone is. But when you're sharing your game screens with Game Chat, you know at a glance what other players are doing. You can have exchanges like, "Ah, I see you're struggling in that cave. I'm coming to help you." If information can be shared more easily between players, it gives you more ways to play the game. This was something we learned over the course of development. End quotes. What's interesting to me is the idea that people can use the camera and point to the controller to demo a button or demonstrate potentially a particular technique. I'm not sure how functional this would be at a distance. Would you need to chop between screens to see it clearly? And they don't say whether the same crystal clarity afforded to faces is also given to hands and the controller, although it would make sense. Additionally, this is the second time that they've mentioned an indie title, and although these are relatively big indies, I think it's nice to get an insight into the non-Nintendo gaming tastes of the Nintendo development staff. They also reference some other diverse games in this next extract, where Tokunaga says, "The same goes for Animal Crossing New Horizons. You can go visit your friend's island when you're playing online, but even if you're busy on your own island, if you can see your chat partner's game screen, you can say, for example, 'Hey, Red's on your island, let me come over and shop.' It felt like my field of vision had suddenly expanded beyond my own personal game world, which I thought was a great experience." End quote. This is a very cool functionality and certainly opens up the chance to communicate between islands, but it also makes me wonder whether it would also somewhat crimp Animal Crossing's place as a social hub in its own right. So far, we've only seen GameChat described as a generic app that is able to be utilized by any device. However, is it possible that for a game such as Animal Crossing, they could build in some bespoke functionalities using GameChat? Quite what these would be, I'm not sure, and I'm sort of reminded of how in early versions of Animal Crossing you could play NES games, but this feature was rendered superfluous in recent titles by innovations such as NSO, and perhaps the same thing will happen here. The next quote is particularly interesting for me in relation to a different video I'm working on, so one day you will hear me return to the following quote and discuss this again. Says Ono, "We found that games with a time limit can also become even more fun with GameChat. Part-time UFO doesn't have an online competitive mode, but, for example, two people playing locally could connect to two other players via GameChat and share their game screen, letting them compete for scores as if they were playing 2 versus 2. When you glance at the other team's game screen, you can see how much time they have left and realize, hey, we're winning, or you might get tips on how to win. So it felt like we'd created a new kind of gameplay." End quote. Specifically related to Ring Fit Adventure, he continues, "With the game screen sharing, it's possible to compete against other players, but since the Nintendo Switch 2 camera has a wide-angle view, it might be more fun to see each other moving while playing the game rather than just the game screen. Plus, if you're playing with other people, it feels like you're in it together, which might help you overcome exercises that you would have struggled to do on your own. With camera play, the camera feed is displayed on screen as you play. For example, with Super Mario Party Jamboree Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Jamboree TV, which is compatible with camera play, your face is captured by the camera and displayed next to the character you're playing. In party games, it can sometimes be difficult to keep track of who's using which character, but when you get first place in a minigame, a crown is placed above your face, and if you lose, an effect like "oh no" appears, so it's fun to watch all of that unfold on screen. Camera play can be used both offline and while using GameChat online. By combining it with GameChat, camera play can be enjoyed with friends far away." End quotes. Although Tamura briefly adds, "You don't usually get to see your own facial expressions when playing a game, but it's refreshing to see them displayed on the game screen alongside everyone else's." I am definitely intrigued by this. By calling it camera play, it certainly suggests that they have in mind using this name to refer to multiple outings of the technology, with Super Mario Party Jamboree's Jamboree TV expansion being just the first. I will return to this in a different video focused on the camera expansion, however. The next section they discuss is the one that, frankly, I was most interested and concerned about: security. Obviously, it is a big concern for Nintendo generally, but I wondered if, in these days where digital assistants are apparently listening into us, whether privacy and other concerns would be incorporated into their thinking. However, at present it seems like Nintendo are focused mainly on more traditional gaming concerns around parental controls. Ono says, "We thought a lot about how we could make game chat safe and secure for players. First of all, you won't be able to use game chat with everyone on your friends list by default. We assume some players will have somebody on their friend list who they've only played online with once, and yet somehow they ended up accepting their friend request. Given that possibility, players might feel uncomfortable if suddenly everyone on their friend list can invite them to a video chat. With that in mind, during the initial setup, you can choose the friends you want to be able to chat with from your friend list before you start using game chat. So if you join a room created by a friend, it'll only include people you or your friend have approved for game chat. Even if a friend of a friend is in the room, you'll see that before joining, so you won't end up chatting with people you don't want to. There was a lot of internal discussion about this, and we decided that children under 16 can only use game chat with people on their friend list whom their parent or guardian has given permission to chat with via the Nintendo Switch Parental Controls app. In the case of voice chat, once a parent gives their child approval to chat with a particular person, their child will always be able to connect with the approved person from then on. But we're even more cautious when it comes to video chat. When a child tries to start or join a video chat on their Switch 2, a request is sent to the parent's app. The request must be approved before the video chat can begin. While children may feel a bit restricted, we decided to prioritize safety and require parents to approve the request every time. End quote. This does sound like a great security feature, and it also elegantly removes any legal liability from the software provider in the event that it does lead to any negative communications, because an adult would have to actively approve it. Tamura notes another important feature. The Nintendo Switch 2 camera is also equipped with a privacy shutter that allows the lens to be shut when not in use, and you can see at a glance whether the camera is on or off. Ono continues, we want everyone to feel comfortable using this feature, so we've placed a high priority on safety to avoid any unpleasant experiences. Of course, we want all players to follow the community guidelines even when chatting with friends. End quote. The reference to the community guidelines is interesting. At the moment, they appear in a rather un-Nintendo-like way as a big wall of text with a few generic instructions such as be kind and respectful and we're building this community together. Of course, these are positive and valuable, but it strikes me that a generic list of expectations are less likely to be read and still less likely to be internalized, and I wonder whether there are better ways of inculcating a set of shared community values than with a generic list of guidelines. For now, though, let's pivot to the three amigos for the final words. Asked for their final messages, Tamura says, I'd like everyone to first have fun trying it out with close friends. When Nintendo Switch 2 is released, I'd like to invite my friends who live far away and who I don't often get to see to join me on GameChat and play together using the Nintendo Switch 2 camera. I hope a lot of people will get to experience it. Tokunaga adds, when I played existing games with GameChat, I felt like I was able to see them from a new perspective. I don't know if everyone will experience the same feeling, but whatever game it is, please just ask a friend to join you and give it a try. You can quietly focus on the game or chat while you play. There are lots of ways to enjoy it, so I'd be more than happy if GameChat becomes a part of players' gaming lives. Ono concludes, GameChat is packed with many features, including voice chat, video chat, and the ability to share game screens, but we've developed it so that players can use it without too much effort. So even if you're a first timer, have reservations about voice chat, or don't like difficult features, please give it a try. We developed it so that players would instinctively get how to use it just by playing around. Also, depending on how you use GameChat, you might see games you've played previously in a new light. Even as developers, we definitely haven't discovered all the ways that GameChat can be used with existing games. I hope players will discover lots of more new and interesting ways to play with it. End quote. I guess I'm reminded here of the way that the Tears of the Kingdom developers were influenced by the way that people in Breath of the Wild would hack together mechanisms using the limited physics and chemistry engine facilities in the original game. I'm sure that Nintendo will be keeping a close eye on what we do. And this is the main overlooked aspect in the interview to me. Apart from references to the camera shutter, there is little discussion on broader privacy issues and what happens to the data and how transparent it is for developers to access. Is there anything specifically stopping Nintendo employees from harvesting data to see what people are doing and how they're using the chat functionalities and even specifically what they're saying? You would hope they wouldn't use it for this purpose, but being of a suspicious mind, I would like to see the terms and conditions. Still, while I realise GameChat hasn't been the best received of Nintendo Switch 2's innovations, and I find that myself I'm not quite sure how often I'll really use it, I do think it's a great idea with a lot of potential. Do please return for future videos where I will be discussing the vast potential of the camera functionality. And please also like, share, comment, subscribe, and check out the Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.